Oh man, that was really quick. That was awesome. That's great because this morning I'm not starting with the scripture reading, so I'm glad. So this morning I am going to do this a little bit different. I'm actually going to begin with sharing something and a little bit of instruction before we read the passage that we're going to be talking about this morning. And so to start off, I just want to kind of give this picture, this analogy. Sometimes we treat church a little bit like a restaurant, and we even use a lot of language to talk about this. We say things like, I need to find a church with good preaching because that's where I am fed. Which, if we stop to think about it, is kind of an odd thing to say because it suggests two things. One, it suggests that simply being in God's presence and all the other things that we do as worship, like communal singing or prayer or communion, aren't things that feed us spiritually. That somehow it's only when Scripture is explained to us that we are fed. And it also suggests that we come to church to have someone serve up a very specific nourishment on a platter to feed us. We also kind of sometimes use phrases like meat and potatoes preaching, which is often a euphemism for meaning that a pastor makes a statement that I find convincing, suggesting that the job of a sermon is to change us or to fix our minds. But I don't think that church is supposed to be like this. I don't think church is like a restaurant. I think it's perhaps even more like maybe a group cooking class where we learn together and from each other how to prepare and nourish not just ourselves, but other people. And I'm not saying this because it's directed at anybody here. I'm sharing this because that's how I grew up treating the church, like it was a restaurant. And it wasn't until I was in Bible college when I saw this difference of how church could be and about how I was being fed spiritually and how that could look very different. And that process changed also in how I see and hear the Bible. One of the stories that helped along that change, that process for me, was the story that we're going to read in a moment. It is the story of Hagar, the Egyptian slave of Sarah, or Sarai, which I will use interchangeably, in the book of Genesis, who became the mother of Ishmael. And for those of you who are not familiar, Ishmael is the son of Abraham and the brother to Isaac, who became the forefather to the Muslim nation. If you've heard this story before and you're familiar, you might be very familiar with why when we often hear this story, we immediately become focused on like certain scandalous details. The ones that to our day and age seem kind of ridiculous. These details are scandalous and they are ridiculous, but that's actually not the point of the story. To be able to hear, it's not this idea that somehow God's just saying, oh, here's this absolute travesty of a story, and I just want you to hear it for no reason. There's something else in this story. Nor is the point of this story to explain away the conflicts and difficulties in our lives. Because many times we reduce this story to the beginning and the origin of the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael, which led to the conflict between Israel and the Muslim nation, and by extension, the conflict between Christians and Muslims. Because when we do that, we have a tendency to see ourselves as the good guys or Israel as the good guys. And that must mean that Isaac is the hero of the story and Ishmael is the villain. But that is not the story in the Bible. In fact, that's not even a story in the Bible. Ishmael left the household when Isaac was a week old. Isaac and Ishmael are not the main characters of this story. Their mothers, Hagar and Sarai, are the main characters. And the mess between them makes it clear that neither woman is a hero nor the villain. Rather, they are two human women stuck in a messy human life and who got lost in their own perception of things. And it takes God intervene and showing up to reveal the truth to them. So to tell the story, what we're going to do is I'm going to read two excerpts from Genesis about this story. And you're going to notice that up here I've highlighted certain phrases and certain key things. And what I would like to do is to invite each of you that when we reach a phrase or a word that has anything to do with seeing or hearing, I want us all to please touch our eyes or our ears. And it's going to feel a little silly, like maybe some sort of Sunday school experiment. But I want us to engage our bodies with this reading in the hopes that we can maybe really engage with this this common theme that keeps reoccurring, these important phrases in the passage that have to do with hearing and seeing. So we're going to read this together and listen. And I'm reading it in a kind of a combined version. I took the NRSVUE, which is the one I normally read for a message on a Sunday, and I'm including it with the First Testament, which is a very literal translation, and I combined them to create this one we're reading this morning. So now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian slave whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abraham, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go to my slave. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. He went into Hagar, she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was slight in her eyes. Then Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became slight in her eyes. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Your slave is in your power. Do to her what is good in your eyes." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she ran away from her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur, and he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" And she said, "I am running away from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Now you have conceived and shall bear a son. You shall name him Ishmael," meaning God hears. "For the Lord has listened to your suffering. He shall be a wild ass of a man, and his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and how he shall live at odds with all of his kin." So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roy," God seeing me. I pointed the wrong thing. God seeing me. For she said, "I have really seen God," and remained alive after seeing him. Therefore, the well was called Beer Lahai Roy, which means the well of the living one seeing me. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Then we have some other things that happen in the life of Abram and Sarai, and there's a name change, and Sarah then becomes Sarah, and she has a baby. And then we pick up with this story in Genesis 21. The child, this is meaning Isaac, grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very bad in Abraham's eyes on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "It isn't to be bad in your eyes because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do. Listen to her voice, for it is through Isaac that your offspring will be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered around in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." As she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and take strong hold of him with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So as already stated, I'm sharing this story with you because it was one of the ones that was a part of this process that really changed how I see and hear the Bible. And incidentally, it's also one of the reasons that I love the Old Testament so much, and so I kind of wanted to share it with you so you could maybe figure out why I find the Old Testament actually really thrilling. And I understand that this isn't suddenly going to turn our whole church into this big group of let's nerd out about the Hebrew Bible. But I still wanted to share it with you because I also wanted to share with you about how when we do this kind of thing, when we read and hear and see the story in a different way, different than how we would normally understand it, we end up seeing something about ourselves as well, learning something about who God is and who we are in light of him. Because the human ear and eyes of Sarah and Hagar and Abraham all had this very distorted perspective, and it was only God who was able to see things as they really are. Sarah, Hagar, and Abraham all bought into this kind of lie that competition was the foundation of the relationship with other people. Sarah and Hagar viewed themselves and their children as being in competition with each other, and they fought against each other, and Abraham went along with it. But the truth is that they were not in competition. It was something that was fabricated. And this is a lie that many of us also buy into in our lives. And I want to give a couple of examples to just explain what I mean by this. Part of the lie of competition is the basis for this entire series that we're doing. We are doing this heroes and villains series, and then we kind of had that nod at the end to explain it's actually not heroes and villains, because that heroes and villains way of reading a story is the lie that tells us that there is a good guy and there is a bad guy in every conflict, and that our main task is to find out who is who so we can know which side that we are on, and so we can find out who to blame. We can find out who we need to cheer for. But this is not true. This is not a reality. Instead, the reality is that most conflicts, and not every single one, but most conflicts involve two guilty parties and an escalating pattern of issues. But when we do this thing where we lie and we label one party as the guilty party, then what we do is we excuse all the mistakes of the other side. And we end up in this process turn hypocrisy into a virtue. When we believe this lie of competition in an individual conflict, it's going to usually lead us to the stubborn refusal to admit our own mistakes. Because if I can be able to see the mistake you made, I'm able to determine you're the bad guy, I must be the innocent one by default, and then therefore I don't have to be honest or own up to any of my part in this mess that we find ourselves in. Or it just also matters, especially in our current political culture, our current polarized space. Well, if your side made a mistake and did a terrible thing, then that means you're the bad guys. And since my side is the opposite of yours and didn't do that one specific terrible thing, we don't even have to look and see if we have other terrible things on our side. I'm the right side. I don't have to look at it. And this just causes a perpetual guarantee for more and more conflict. This lie of competition also leads us to another problem within that same concept of competition. If I believe I am in competition with everybody else, I'm going to stop hoping for them to do well. In fact, I need for them to do poor in order that I not be the loser. It doesn't even make me a winner. It just means I'm not the loser. We start to believe that to win or to just not be the loser, it means that I have to make the other side lose or be less than. But this is not the reality of how our lives work. The truth is that succeeding isn't really an individual experience anyway. This is not a zero-sum game where there can only be one winner. And I can't help but wonder, what if Hagar and Sarai had treated each other as teammates instead of opposition? I think the implications of what would have been drastically different. And I think that's important for us to understand that that lie is what led to the problem. Because sometimes we read this story and we think that God wanted Hagar to be abused and mistreated, that she had to go through it in order for his will to be done. But that's absurd. Because the truth is God did not want these terrible things to happen to Hagar. But he did intervene in the terrible things, into the terrible lies, into the terrible distortions, and he changed and he redeemed them. He intervened into the bad things. He didn't want it to happen in the first place. Hagar and Sarai were not in opposition, but they believed the lie that they were, and because they believed that lie, these terrible things happened in both of their lives. This lie of competition leads us to another way, not just only how we see other people, but it also begins to impact how we see and evaluate ourselves. We start to set goals and expectations of ourselves based on how others might see us. And this especially matters on Mother's Day. This story actually happens before the Joseph story that I did the last time we were working through this series, or the last time we had a conversation that was a part of the series. But I wanted to specifically save this story for Mother's Day. And it's not just because it's a story about two mothers, it's because it's a story that exposes this lie of how we have to strive for a certain ideal so that we can be accepted when we're seen by human eyes, including our own. And the truth is that we all struggle with this. This is not something that is limited to only women or mothers, that there's these impossible standards that we set for ourselves and how we berate ourselves when we fail to meet these arbitrary expectations. But I think right now we are in this kind of comfortable space where we're willing to talk about it in the context of women and mothers. That there is this certain idea, this certain picture that I need to meet. First, even the fact that we do this, especially within Christian church, that we claim a false notion that the most important thing for a woman to do is to be a mother. That's just not true. And don't get me wrong, I love being a mom. I need to say that especially for the kids there. I do. I really like being a mom, and it's something that I find very meaningful and important in my life. But I don't want to buy into this idea, that this lie, that I am more or less because of being a mother. That is not God's expectation, and it is not God's blessing. It is a cultural one, and throughout history, including church history, we've not always agreed on this. There was many years, and still in some places, that the highest standard for a woman in the eyes of God is to be a cloistered nun. So it would be false for us to believe this idea and place this expectation on ourselves that the most important thing we can do is be a mom in the first place. And then if someone does have that privilege of becoming a mother, we end up setting for ourselves these impossible standards of what it means to be a so-called good mom. It's this impossible standard to meet all of these expectations of what that looks like. But this is not what God is looking for. And this is why it's important, because it's not just for women and it's not just for mothers. This is what we all can experience and end up believing. We look around with our own eyes and we set all different kinds of expectations for ourselves. What our jobs should look like, what our income should look like, how we physically should look and appear, what our families should look like. And we do this both as mothers and fathers. We put so much pressure on our kids needing to be and look a certain way, because otherwise it indicates somehow we failed. We do this with our homes. We have these expectations of what our homes should look like, what our daily practices should look like. And we strive to meet all of these standards that we set for ourselves, but they're all the standards we have set because of our own eyes. We have tried to meet these expectations of what is good in our own eyes. And this is the crux of the story. This is the reason why it matters when we can read the story and we can hear over and over and over again the comparison between seeing and hearing with human eyes and human ears and how God perceives things. When we get lost in our own perception, we end up believing all kinds of lies. And it's not that God doesn't care what's going on in our lives. He cares very much. God cared about what was happening for Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael and Isaac. He listened to them. He heard them. He answered them. He saw them and he went to them. What is going on in our lives matters, and he cares what it looks like. But he cares what it looks like according to what he sees and hears, because that is where we find truth. And that is where we can break from the lies and the distortions that we get caught up in. This is why it matters when we understand that how we read the Bible, how we treat each other as the church, that if we treat each other like a restaurant, we're going to end up having a distortion. But if we want to find truth, if we want to break away from those lies that hold us back, we need to see and hear how God sees and hears us. Let's close with prayer. God, we are grateful that you are the God who sees us in an honest and truthful and a real way. And God, we are grateful that you are the God who intervenes when we get stuck in lies, when we get stuck in distortions, when we get stuck in the wrong things. I've seen it in my own life. I see it in the lives of the stories of the people in the Bible. I see how you time and time again break into those broken spaces and you redeem it to something good. That is the God that you are. That is the truth that you bring when we are living in darkness and blind to the reality of how things really work. And God, we ask for us to tune into you, to listen, to hear the things as you would have them be heard, to see the things as you would have them be seen. That we can stop relying on how we think about things and start seeing it from your perspective, that we are changed and redeemed in that process. God, we ask for your blessing on us as this is what we strive for. In your name, amen. So we're going to